The marble lobby gleamed like a frozen lake beneath the harsh hum of fluorescent lights. Midnight meant the building was nearly silent, but the quiet didn't scare Chloe Park. She hummed softly to herself, a tune without words, as she pushed her cart across the wide expanse. Her sneakers squeaked faintly against the floor, and she carried a brimming bucket of water, thinking only of how fast she could finish and sneak in a sketch for the dress idea that had been nagging her all week. She didn't glance around. Why would she? At this hour, the hallways were empty, the executives long gone. With a practiced flick, she tipped the bucket forward, water cascading like a silver sheet across the polished floor. The splash echoed. Then came a sound she hadn't expected, a sharp intake of breath, a startled voice. "Hey, what the?" Her head snapped up. A man stood directly in front of her, impossibly tall, dressed in a dark suit so perfectly tailored it looked sculpted on his frame. But the lower half of those $1,000 trousers was drenched, water dripping steadily to his polished shoes. "Oh my God," Chloe gasped. The bucket clattered from her hands, spinning on its rim before toppling over. She slapped her palms over her mouth. I didn't see you. You came out of nowhere, I swear. I thought the hallway was empty." He didn't move. His expression was unreadable, carved from stone, his jaw tense. The droplets slid off the fabric like tiny diamonds. "That was unnecessary," he said at last, voice low, measured, like someone containing something dangerous beneath the words. Chloe scrambled to the cart and snatched a yellow microfiber cloth. Her hand trembled as she extended it toward him like a peace offering. "Here, this works great. Absorbs everything. I even use it on my mom's stove. Unless that suit's made of unicorn wool or something, it'll dry right up." The man's gaze fled, keeked from the cloth to her face, then down to the glistening floor, then back to the cloth again. He remained motionless, every line of his body rigid, like she'd offered him a live snake instead of fabric. Chloe forced a nervous smile. "Sorry about that, Mr. Fancy Suit." Her voice wavered, but her tone aimed for lightness, humor. If she was going down, she'd at least make it less pathetic. He said nothing. Silence spread, thick and awkward, louder than any scolding could have been. Then, without a word, he turned, carefully stepping around the puddle, and walked toward the elevator. Chloe blinked, still holding out the cloth. "You're really not going to take it?" she called weakly after him. "It's from the dry and hug line. You're missing out." The elevator doors closed with a metallic sigh, leaving her alone with the spilled bucket, the soaked floor, and a crushing sense of doom. Her brand new job, and she had already drenched the one person who looked like he could buy the whole block without blinking. Hours later in the cafeteria, whispers buzzed around her like gnats. "Did you hear what happened to the guy from the executive floor?" one admin worker said. "Someone threw water on him. He was soaked waist down." "Richard Collins, wasn't it?" another replied. Chloe froze mid-sip of iced tea. "Richard? Who?" "Richard Collins," the woman repeated, wide-eyed. "The CEO, just got back from a trip, doesn't touch anyone, always in gloves, cold as a final boss in a video game." Chloe's stomach dropped. Gloves, immaculate suit, that frozen stare. She'd soaked the CEO with bleach water. She'd handed him a stove rag. She sank into her chair, whispering, "Oh no, no, no." Somewhere high above them, in a quiet office no one dared enter, Richard Collins sat at his desk, carefully drying the hem of his ruined trousers with disposable towels. Fresh gloves lay folded on the table, but his mind wasn't on the fabric or the water. He kept replaying the moment, the bucket, the fearless eyes of the girl who hadn't looked away, her ridiculous offering of a dry and hug cloth. Unbelievable, unacceptable, intriguing. She should have vanished into the anonymity of his carefully guarded world. Instead, against all reason, she had left a mark. And Richard Collins, untouched for 15 years, found himself unsettled by the memory of a janitor who refused to shrink, even after soaking the most untouchable man in the building. The marble floor had dried by morning, but the spark that had been lit between them lingered, dangerous, inconvenient, impossible to ignore. The building never slept. Even when the boardroom lights were dimmed and the offices emptied, vault dynamics pulsed with the quiet breath of servers, the low thrum of generators, the weight of secrets hidden behind glass walls. That was the world Chloe Park stepped into the next night, mop in hand, still replaying the accident in her mind. She had barely survived her first day without getting fired. The memory of the CEO's cold gaze still clung to her skin, yet something stranger clung to her too. The fact that he hadn't yelled, hadn't exploded. He had simply walked away, and somehow that was worse. Tonight she moved slower, glancing over her shoulder as though Richard Collins might materialize from the shadows again. She hummed softer, her nerves wrapped tight. But even in her unease, her eyes caught details others ignored. The design of the glass panels, the sleek edges of the tables, the way the company's posters touted innovation but lacked any warmth. Her designer's eye never slept. She had just finished wiping the last conference chair when her gaze snagged on something odd. A brown folder lay half hidden under the glass table. It was thicker than most, edges crisp, stamped confidential. She hesitated. The right thing would be to set it on the table, untouched. But her hand twitched. Curiosity was her curse, the same instinct that once drove her to tear apart old radios as a kid, sketch entire clothing lines in the margins of her school books. Chloe knelt, slid the folder open, and felt her breath hitch. Across the top of the first page, Project Aurora, restricted access. She should have shut it instantly. Instead, she skimmed. Technical drawings of wristbands, charts of materials and cost breakdowns, prototypes of wearable health devices. She didn't understand the engineering, but she understood design, and what she saw made her frown. The band material was wrong, too abrasive for daily wear. The interface looked sleek but awkward, buttons crammed too close together, and the math. Someone had multiplied instead of divided, skewing the unit cost by almost $100. Her mind raced. Whoever presented this would face embarrassment, or worse, a massive financial hole. She knew she should leave it, but her fingers itched. Pulling out a notepad she carried for sketches, she scribbled neat observations. Material, swap for silicone with breathable cover. Buttons, spread by 3 millimeters, texture variations for blind touch. Cost error page 12, $163.33. Not $244.50. Add more feminine design. Over 50% of users are women. When she was done, she stared at the sheet in disbelief. What kind of janitor left notes on $1 million project? She bit her lip, then added one last touch. From her purse, she dug out colorful sticky notes, leftovers from her design days. On pink, brilliant concept, congrats. On yellow, marketing will love the sleep tracking. On green, battery life risk, consider solar. On blue, sorry for being nosy, can't help it. Chloe, the janitor who soaked your suit. She stuck them neatly on the front of the folder, placed it back in the center of the table, and forced herself to walk away before guilt consumed her. The next morning, Richard Collins arrived early. He needed clarity before meeting investors. Unlocking the conference room, he spotted the folder placed neatly in the middle of the glass table. His pulse ticked up. He remembered putting it in his locked drawer. He flipped it open and froze. Sticky notes, handwritten sheets. His jaw clenched. Someone had trespassed into restricted territory. Someone had crossed a line. He almost called security, almost, until he saw the name at the bottom of the page. Chloe, the janitor who soaked your suit. For a long moment he sat in silence, fury simmering. Then he began to read. At first, annoyance. How dare she scribble amateur comments on a project worth billions? But as his eyes scanned the notes, his expression shifted. The error she pointed out, she was right. He had checked those numbers himself, but somehow missed it. Her design suggestions weren't trivial. They solved flaws his team of engineers hadn't addressed. Her notes about the female demographic, about the battery, insights his board had dismissed countless times. Richard leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He was supposed to be angry, to summon her and demand an explanation, maybe even fire her. Yet all he felt was unsettled. A janitor had corrected a project his elite team had been nurturing for months, and she had done it with humor, with color-coded post-its, with that same irreverence that had haunted his thoughts since the soaked suit incident. He pressed the intercom. "Marcus," he said to his assistant. His voice was steady, but his pulse raced. "Find out everything you can about the new night janitor, the one named Chloe Park." Marcus hesitated on the line. "Sir, is there a problem?" Richard's gloved fingers tightened around the folder. "Let's call it professional curiosity." And as the intercom clicked silent, Richard Collins realized something he hadn't admitted in 15 years. A stranger had breached his carefully built walls, not with force, not with power, but with humor, color, and inconvenient brilliance. And he was no longer sure if he wanted those walls to stand. The elevator doors slid shut with a metallic sigh, sealing Richard Collins and Chloe Park into a narrow box of glass and steel. At first, there was nothing unusual, just the gentle hum of descent, the flicker of polished numbers overhead. Richard stood tall and rigid in his charcoal suit, phone pressed to his ear, murmuring clipped commands to someone on the other end. Chloe leaned against her mop handle, humming faintly, her bucket at her side, pretending she wasn't aware that the most untouchable man in the company was sharing the small space with her. Then, without warning, the elevator jolted. A sharp metallic groan echoed up the cables. The lights flickered once, twice, and then everything stilled. The car hung suspended between floors, swathed in pale red emergency light. Chloe blinked, tilting her head. Well, that's not good. She pressed the ground floor button, then another. Nothing. She gave the panel a firm slap with her palm. Still nothing. Guess the building decided to give us some quality time. Richard's breath came out in a hiss. He immediately reached for the emergency phone. Dead. He checked his cell. No signal. For the first time since Chloe had met him, the CEO's composure cracked. His shoulders tightened, his jaw locked, and his movements became clipped, frantic. He paced the short span of the elevator like a caged animal. No, 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 he muttered, his voice lower, strained. This can't be happening, not here, not like this. Chloe's eyebrows furrowed. She had expected icy annoyance, maybe scolding, but not this raw panic. His hand trembled as he pressed it to his forehead, his breath shallow and fast. The gloves that usually looked like armor now seemed like shackles. Hey, she said gently, crouching down to set her mop aside. Easy, it's just a stall. Someone will notice soon. Maintenance will get us out. You don't understand, Richard snapped, his voice too sharp, too tight. He closed his eyes, gripping the steel rail so hard his knuckles whitened. I can't be trapped. Not in a box. Not again. Chloe's stomach tightened. She recognized the look. Not the arrogance of a powerful man, but the suffocating fear of someone fighting ghosts. Slowly, carefully, she sank to the floor, crossing her legs. Then don't stand. Sit with me. It feels bigger down here. Trust me, I once lived behind a row of washing machines. If I could survive that, we'll survive this. His head jerked toward her. You lived where? She grinned, trying to pull him away from his spiraling fear. Long story. Bad boyfriend, burned down apartment, kind old lady with a laundromat, the hum of those machines like a giant lullaby. Sometimes I pretended. The clothes coming in had secret lives. There was this blue suit, always with the same coffee stain. I called him Mr. Clumsy. A strangled sound escaped Richard. Not quite a laugh, not quite disbelief, but the panic in his eyes eased just slightly. Chloe leaned back against the wall. You know, you look like the type who's got a wardrobe full of Mr. Clumsies, expensive ones. I don't, Richard began, but his voice shook. He pressed his palms into his thighs, trying to slow his breathing. For the first time, Chloe noticed he wasn't wearing gloves. In the rush of his meeting earlier, maybe he'd forgotten. His bare hands trembled openly. She tilted her head. You always wear those gloves, don't you? Why? His eyes locked onto hers, and for a long beat, he said nothing. The emergency light painted his face in raw shadows, stripping him of his usual mask. Finally, he whispered, their protection. From what? From people, from closeness, from women. The words sounded torn out of him, unwilling confessions. Chloe's chest tightened. That's not protection. That's a prison. He shook his head. My mother left when I was 7. She brought men into the house, different faces every week, until one day she was gone too. I decided then, never again. No closeness, no weakness. His voice cracked like glass. The silence in the elevator deepened. The cold CEO with ice in his veins was suddenly nothing more than a man carrying abandonment like a stone in his chest. Chloe studied him, her heart heavy. You know what I think? She said softly. I think one person broke you and you've been punishing the whole world for it ever since. That's not fair to you or anyone else. Richard swallowed hard, his throat working. Chloe extended her hand, palm open, steady as if she were holding a key. Here, touch my hand, just to see. If the world ends, we'll deal with it together. His gaze darted between her face and her outstretched hand, his breath uneven. For 15 years, he had avoided this simplest of acts. But something in her eyes, unguarded, warm, fearless, pulled him forward. Slowly, almost painfully, he raised his hand and laid it in hers. Warmth, that was all. Her skin was soft, her pulse steady. The world didn't shatter, the elevator didn't collapse. The only sound was their breathing, slowing in sync. Chloe's voice was a whisper. See? The world's still turning. For the first time in years, Richard Collins felt something shift. Not panic, not control. Something fragile, terrifying, and alive. He didn't know if it was hope or danger, but he knew one thing for certain. The janitor who once soaked his suit had just dismantled his strongest wall with nothing but her hand. The next days at Vault Dynamics didn't feel like the same company. Where the hallways once echoed only with clipped footsteps and hushed whispers, a new energy seemed to seep through the walls. It started small. A janitor laughing too loudly in the lobby. A receptionist caught humming at her desk. A technician in IT leaving a folded paper crane for a colleague. Nobody could quite explain it, but everyone felt it, like someone had opened a window in a building that had long forgotten what fresh air tasted like. The epicenter of this change? Chloe Park. One morning while she polished the lobby floors, she leaned down to water the giant potted fern that stood like a silent guard by the glass doors. A few employees passed by, heads bent over emails on their phones. Chloe tilted the watering can and said, "Morning, sweetheart. Your leaves look gorgeous today." Sandra, the receptionist, stopped in her tracks. "Did you just talk to the plant?" "Of course I did." Chloe gave the fern an approving nod. "Plants are like shy coworkers. They thrive when you acknowledge them." Sandra burst into laughter, but when she returned to her desk, she caught herself whispering, "Hope you're doing okay today," to the succulent by her phone. By that afternoon, people across departments were jokingly greeting the greenery. "Looking sharp today, cactus. Don't wilt on us, buddy." Within a week, someone had stuck googly eyes on a ficus, and suddenly the plants had personalities, inside jokes, names. It was ridiculous, it was human, and it was contagious. The real turning point came late one night. The lobby speakers crackled to life with a soft instrumental track. An old 80s pop song turned gentle. Chloe, mop in hand, began to sway without thinking, her feet light, her voice humming along. Her mop handle became a dance partner, spinning with her across the polished marble. Two security guards, Carlos and Miguel, stopped near the doorway, trying not to laugh. Chloe spotted them and grinned. "Carlos, you know salsa?" He hesitated. "A little." "Perfect. You're my partner." She thrust the mop into Miguel's hands. "And you're the cameraman. Don't screw it up." Miguel laughed so hard he almost dropped his phone, but he pressed record as Carlos stepped forward, shy but willing. What followed wasn't elegant. It was chaotic, full of missteps, laughter, Chloe's bright pink Crocs squeaking across the floor, but it was alive. By the end, the janitor and the guard were spinning under the glow of the lobby lights while Miguel wheezed with laughter behind the camera. The video hit the company's internal chat before dawn. "When work actually gets fun," Miguel captioned it. By morning, it had gone viral inside the building. By lunch, people were sharing it on their personal feeds. By evening, strangers on the internet were calling Vault Dynamics the company with the dancing janitor. For most CEOs, it would have been a nightmare. For Richard Collins, it was a test. When Marcus showed him the clip, Richard prepared himself for irritation. Dancing on company property, cameras, potential scandal. He pressed play. He watched Chloe spin, laughing, Carlos blushing, Miguel nearly crying with amusement. He braced for anger, but then something unexpected happened. He laughed. Not the polite, carefully measured chuckle he used to disarm board members. A real laugh, sharp and unguarded, echoing through his office. He startled himself with the sound. Marcus stared at him as if the sky had cracked. By evening, the video had been reposted by workplace culture blogs. Headlines screamed, "Vault Dynamics proves fun is part of success." Investors liked the sudden surge of positive press. Employees whispered about their CEO's strange new smile. But joy never comes without shadows. A week later, Chloe was in the cafeteria when her phone buzzed. A message, a gossip blog link. She clicked and froze. Ambitious janitor seduces millionaire CEO. The scandal at Vault Dynamics. Her breath left her in a rush. The article was venom disguised as wit. Grainy photos of her walking near Richard's office. Her name tied to words like opportunist, manipulator, schemer. It mocked her past as a failed designer, suggested her clumsy mop dance was staged to catch the CEO's attention. The comments were worse, strangers tearing her apart as though she were public property. Around her, whispers rose. A few coworkers looked away in shame, others with suspicion. The cafeteria suddenly felt smaller than the elevator had. Richard saw the article hours later. His face darkened. "Shut it down," he barked at legal. "Sue them, blacklist them, I don't care what it takes." "Sir," Marcus said carefully, "some of the board believes limiting your visible connection with Miss Park would be wise, at least until this blows over." Richard's hand slammed onto the desk. "Absolutely not. I won't let gutter gossip dictate my decisions." But when he went looking for her, she was gone. He found her eventually, in the janitor's closet, a cardboard box half filled with her belongings. Her eyes were red, her hands shaking as she folded her uniform. "What are you doing?" His voice was sharp, but his chest felt like it was caving in. "I'm quitting." Her words were brittle, like glass about to shatter. "Not because of the article, because of what it means. People will never stop doubting me. They'll always say I'm using you, and I can't let you go back into your shell because of me. Chloe, you can't leave. You're important to this company, to me. Her lips trembled, but her spine stayed straight. That's exactly why I have to. Take care of yourself, Richard, and don't put the gloves back on. You're better without them. She picked up the box and walked past him, leaving only the echo of her footsteps and the faint scent of cleaning solution in her wake. The building felt different the next morning. The lobby plants drooped, the chatter dimmed, the warmth faded. Vault Dynamics was back to being just another company. Richard Collins slipped his gloves back on, but now they didn't feel like armor. They felt like chains. The janitor's closet smelled of bleach and lemon oil, but beneath the cleaning supplies and rags, Richard found something unexpected. It happened late at night, long after Chloe had walked out of Vault Dynamics with her cardboard box. He shouldn't have. Have you been there? CEOs didn't wander supply rooms, but he'd been searching, first her locker, then her cart, then here, hoping for some trace of her, something that explained the void she left behind. On the top shelf, tucked behind a dented carton of paper towels, sat a battered shoebox sealed with tape. For a moment he hesitated. Opening it felt like trespassing, but his hands, ungloved for once, betrayed him. He pulled the box down, peeled back the tape, and lifted the lid. Inside lay a stack of envelopes, each carefully marked in looping script. Letters to future me. Some were dated years ago, others only weeks. They weren't polished. They weren't even meant for eyes like his. Yet as Richard thumbed through them, words leapt off the pages and clawed at him. Today I scrubbed floors until my knees hurt, but I thought of the dress I never made, the one with hidden pockets for women who need to carry their lives in silence. Maybe someday. Lissa laughed today. Real laughter. I caught it like sunlight in a jar. I'd give anything to keep her smiling forever. If anyone ever looks at me and sees more than a mop, I hope I'm brave enough to let them. Richard's throat burned. Each letter was a window into the woman he had underestimated, a designer forced into invisibility, a sister carrying the weight of another's illness, a dreamer who still dared to sketch gowns after midnight. And tucked between the letters were scraps of napkins covered in doodles, little diagrams of dresses, shoes, even wristbands eerily similar to prototypes from Project Aurora. He sank onto an overturned bucket, clutching one letter in his hands. His empire of glass and steel suddenly felt hollow compared to her raw honesty. He realized with brutal clarity that she hadn't just walked away from a job. She had walked away from him because she thought she was protecting him. The next morning, Richard didn't show up at the executive entrance. He was at a corner coffee cart near Chloe's neighborhood. The air smelled of burnt espresso and rain. He wore no gloves. The barista blinked twice, seeing HA. I am Vault's CEO, standing in line like an ordinary man. He ordered a cappuccino and waited, though his eyes were on the stack of paper cups, each blank canvas for doodles. When his cup arrived, he lingered, hoping. Nothing, just foam and cardboard. But he returned the next day, and the next, and the next. Each time the barista slid him a cup with a tiny sketch on it, a sun, a clumsy heart, a mop with sparkles, a shoe. He didn't need to ask who was behind it, only Chloe drew like that, quick, whimsical, alive. By the 6th day, the cup bore words instead of pictures. If you're brave, invite me to dance. No gloves. That night, he set to work. The parking lot of Vault Dynamics, normally sterile and gray, bloomed with strings of fairy lights borrowed from supply closets. Music hummed from hidden speakers, soft jazz, then salsa, then a waltz. It was absurd. It was reckless. It was everything Richard Collins had never dared to be. When Chloe arrived, summoned by nothing but curiosity and a hunch, she stopped dead. There he was, waiting, suit jacket discarded, his white shirt sleeves rolled up. No gloves, no armor, just a man standing beneath cheap lights, eyes searching for hers. You can't be serious, she whispered, clutching her bag to her chest. Deadly serious, he said, his voice steady but his hands trembling. He stepped closer, offering his bare hand. Dance with me, even if I step on your toes, even if I make a fool of myself. Dance with me. Chloe's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Slowly she placed her hand in his. His grip was warm, human, hesitant. He led her clumsily into a slow spin. His foot landed squarely on hers. She yelped. He cursed. They both laughed, the sound ringing brighter than the fairy lights overhead. As they moved, awkward, stumbling, alive, the world outside the parking lot seemed to vanish. No gossip blogs, no board meetings, no gloves, just two souls daring to believe that walls could crumble and wounds could heal. But Richard knew the dance was only the beginning, because in the shadows of Project Aurora, secrets still waited to be unearthed, secrets that tied Chloe's past to Vault's future in ways neither of them yet imagined. The conference room was a fortress of glass and steel, but that morning it felt more like a courtroom. Every seat at the long table was filled, board members in stiff suits, senior executives whispering behind tablets, a handful of journalists brought in under the guise of transparency. At the head of the table sat Richard Collins, jaw tight, gloveless hands folded on the folder in front of him. To his right, in a plain blazer she had borrowed from Rosalind the cook, sat Chloe Park. The chairman, Harold Whitman, tapped his pen against the polished surface. The sound echoed like a gavel. "Mr. Collins, this meeting concerns your extracurricular involvement with an employee. The integrity of Vault Dynamics is at stake." Richard didn't flinch. "Her name is Miss Park, and she's sitting right here." The whispers grew louder. A ripple of disdain moved across the suits. Someone muttered, "Cleaning staff." Another hissed, "Disaster for the brand image." Chloe's spine stiffened, but she stayed silent. She had learned that sometimes silence had more weight than any defense. Whitman leaned forward, voice dripping condescension. "With all due respect, this company has invested billions into Project Aurora. Clients, investors, regulators, they expect stability. Instead, they see gossip columns filled with photos of our CEO consorting with a janitor." Richard slammed his palm on the table, the sound like thunder. "She is more than a janitor," she corrected. "A multi-million-dollar error in Aurora's budget before any of you noticed. She improved our design strategy with insights none of our consultants thought to consider. You call her a liability. I call her the reason Aurora is still viable." The room went deathly quiet. Richard's words hung like smoke in the air. Chloe exhaled, steadying herself, and finally spoke. "You want to know why I noticed those mistakes? Because I've seen this project before." Every head turned. Her voice was calm, but beneath it pulsed something electric. "I used to be a fashion designer. 3 years ago, I worked for a boutique firm contracted by a startup. They pitched a wearable health device. Same biometric sensors, same ergonomic issues, same flawed material choice. I suggested alternatives. I was ignored. Months later, my sketches appeared in a patent filing under someone else's name. My career collapsed under lawsuits I couldn't afford to fight. And now," she slid the Aurora folder forward, "I see my stolen ideas repackaged in Vault's flagship project." A gasp went around the table. Richard's eyes snapped to hers, stunned. "Chloe, why didn't you tell me?" She met his gaze, unflinching. "Because I wasn't sure until I saw the specs. And because who would believe a janitor over $1 million research team?" One of the younger executives shifted uncomfortably. "She's right. Look at the patent numbers. There's overlap. Significant overlap." Whitman's face turned crimson. "Nonsense. We purchased those designs legally through our partners." "Partners who stole them," Chloe shot back, her voice sharper now, carrying years of buried humiliation. "You're about to launch a product built on theft, and when it collapses, it won't just ruin me, it'll destroy Vault Dynamics." The journalist scribbled furiously. Cameras clicked. Suspense cracked through the room like lightning. Richard rose slowly to his feet, a storm brewing behind his eyes. For years he had hidden behind gloves, behind contracts, behind silence, but this time he wouldn't. "Enough," he said, his voice low but devastating. "If Miss Park's claims prove true, then we have not only a corporate liability but a moral one, and I will not allow this company to stand on stolen ground. We will investigate every patent, every contract, every name attached to Aurora. If heads must roll, so be it, even if mine is first." The board erupted, half in outrage, half in fear, but Richard's gaze stayed locked on Chloe. She had pulled the rug out from under his empire, yet he felt only admiration. She had risked everything again, not to destroy, but to expose the truth. Chloe swallowed hard, her heart pounding. She had expected Richard to turn on her, to protect his empire at her expense. Instead, he had thrown his gauntlet on the table. For her. With her. In that glass cage, where power was currency and truth was usually expendable, Richard Collins and Chloe Park had just done the unthinkable. They had made honesty more dangerous than any secret. And as the journalists rushed to broadcast the scandal, the world beyond Vault Dynamics prepared for a revelation that would shake not just a company, but the lives of two people who had finally stripped away their armor.